Hello, and welcome to the Those Dweebs podcast, where we have a little bit of everything for everyone. Let's roll the d20 of fate and see what we are talking about today. Hello everyone, and a very happy Halloween, or a very blessed Samhain for those who participate. I am pleased to say that we are nearly at 500 downloads. I'm so super excited about that, and I'm not going to go into full detail. I think I'm going to leave that for the next podcast episode, but I am pleased to say that our presentation that we had in Bloomingdale, Michigan at the little one-room schoolhouse went really well. We had a presentation and an investigation and had a lot of newbies in that have never done anything revolving around paranormal investigation before. So that was fun, and that was our first time actually leading something like that. So super nervous, but it went really, really cool. And like I said, gonna do an entire, separate podcast revolving around what we experienced this last weekend. But then the next day, we had the investigation at the Van Buren poorhouse in Hartford, Michigan. And we got to collab with What Goes Bump in the Night. And it was such a fun and wild experience. It was definitely in my, top 5. Definitely a top 5, and then my top 3 for this year. I can't wait to go into detail about all of that, and I'll probably get Spencer on here, or Michelle, whichever one's here with me at the time when I record it, because we actually split up, and I want to get their side of things before I actually, watch the footage and go from there. But I'm so excited, guys. Oh my god. It was so much fun. I can't wait to go back. I can't wait to collab with What Goes Bump in the Night again. But I digress. I want to get into what I'm doing today. Today, I'm going to be reading from Ghost Stories of Michigan by Dan Asfar. And there's so many, cool little stories in here. They have ones about the Ada Witch and, Utica Cemetery, which all fantastic. And I'm going to go through and probably read a few different ones. I don't know if I'm going to read those ones per se, but yeah, let's get into this. I'm so excited. Alright, our very first one is labeled The Blue Man. Nicole Bray had known for quite some time that the Forest Hills Cemetery in Grand Haven, Michigan had an interesting reputation among locals. Not only did the old burial ground have a rich history with a massacre section set aside for those Michiganders killed in the Civil War, but the urban legends of the cemetery's stairway to hell had been circulating since she was 18. Don't go up there. Kids had warned her when she moved back to Grand Haven with her family in 1987. Crazy things happen up there. With these warnings were probably kicking around in Nicole's head when she took reporters from a local television station along on a ghost hunt in July 2000. With her small retinue of ghost hunters and reporters, she marched into Forest Hills as night fell on the enormous cemetery. It was then she looked up at the staircase embedded into the big hill for the first time, the stairway to hell. Let's go up there, Nicole said, pointing to the staircase she remembered hearing about as a teenager. I want to see what's up there. Indeed, anything with a name like Stairway to Hell would be difficult for most ghost hunters to ignore. But her first climb up the famous stairs ended flatly. They poked around on the hill at the top of the steps for about 5 minutes without seeing, hearing, or feeling a single thing out of the ordinary. So they moved on, intent on going through as much of the cemetery as they could that night. Yet, if her experience at the top of the stairway to hell was disappointing, yet if her experience at the top of the stairway to hell was disappointing for Nicole, the popular response to the turning page report she prepared on the place was anything but. Nicole's website was flooded with letters responding to her internet posting of the WMGHS investigation of Forest Hill. Almost everyone who wrote her asked about the blue man at the top of the stairway to hell. Correspondents, young and old, grilled her about what she witnessed. Had she seen a blue apparition hovering over the tombstone of William M. Ferry? The strong public response to her investigation at Forest Hill provoked her into researching the place. Who was the Blue Man, and why were the stairs that led to him referred to as the Stairway to Hell? After digging a little bit into the local history, Nicole discovered that the Reverend William Ferry had been a prominent theologian in western Michigan who arrived from Massachusetts in 1834. He was an active and ambitious man of God during his lifetime, setting up a mission on Mackinac Island, starting up the Grand Haven Company, establishing the town of Ferrysburg, and co-founding the city of Grand Haven. Given this impressive list of worldly achievements, we may be able to understand William Ferry's reluctance to leave this earth, despite whatever otherworldly paradise he believed was waiting for him. And as for the moniker Stairway to Hell given to the steps that climbed up to his grave, its origins are lost in the folklore of the region, which states that the stairway is a bridge to the afterlife for those buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery. Local legend has it that the souls of the people laid to rest there have to go to the top of that long staircase where their ultimate destiny awaits. If there is a shining light at the top of the hill, that person will go to heaven. But if the darkness of the surrounding night is all there is to be seen, the soul is doomed to walk back down the stairwell, where the fiery pits of hell lie gaping at the bottom. This is spooky so far. As is to be expected, the legend of the Stairway to Hell has resonated with adolescents more than anyone else, and it is teenagers who have had most of the supernatural experiences in Forest Hills. Over the years, succeeding generations of teenagers have gone up the Stairway to Hell with Ouija boards and cameras and have prepared mystical chants with hopes of laying eyes on the Blue Man. Many of these adventurers came to be sorry for what they wished for and walked away from disturbing experiences, claiming that they will never go back up the hill again. Nobody mentions what it is about the Blue Man that is so terrifying. Her preliminary research on the man completed, Nicole decided it was time to take a closer look at his gravesite. The ghost hunter explained what she saw. I went up there to take some pictures of the grave, not at night but during the day, because I was by myself, and I noticed that the 2 trees right beside his grave had cryptic symbols carved all over them. And Nicole is schooled in basic occult symbology and felt a distinct chill when she recognized that many of the marks on the tree were satanic symbols. Who carved these symbols around William Ferry's headstone? Did William Ferry make enemies of the wrong people during his lifetime? Persons who had the means to exact revenge that reached beyond the grave. Perhaps the symbols carved into the 2 surrounding trees have woven some sort of curse on Fairy's soul, binding his essence to his gravesite for eternity. Or maybe Fairy himself did not wish to let go of his earthly being and made some sort of arrangement with Satanists so that a part of his consciousness would live on in perpetuity. Words are hard. Perpetuity. The symbols and the origin of the Blue Man are the kind of mystery that the WMGHS is here for, and Nicole's final words on the topic show her matter-of-fact determination. This is an investigation that's going to be pretty ongoing. That's honestly pretty spooky, but also very interesting. I feel like there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I would totally climb the stairs, but at the same time, like, the other part of me is like, haha, no thanks, I don't want that type of attention, no thank you. But yeah, I feel like that's one of those that you just have to figure out as you get to the location. But yes, let's go on to the next one. Alright, for our next one, we are going to be going through the Calumet Theatre. Actress Adesi Lane was standing horror-struck before the sold-out crowd at the Calumet Theatre, unable to recall her next line. Staring out into the darkness beyond the stage, she posed dramatically, buying herself some time to snap back into the script. But nothing came. The leading lady could not remember the words that her character, Katharina, spoke to the end of the play. Just as she was about to lose herself in a panic, she felt a strong, gentle force slowly lift her arms upwards to the Calumet Theatre second balcony. Her eyes followed, and from out of the darkness above, a striking female apparition suddenly appeared. Miss Lane later remembered how atypically beautiful the woman hovering there before her was, with dark eyes and a pale complexion, crowned by a dark shock of short curly hair. It was the summer of 1958, and William Shakespeare's The Taming of a Shrew was being performed at the old theater in the Upper Peninsula town of Calumet. The theater was constructed in 1900 when the copper on the Keweenaw Peninsula was making men rich, and Calumet's elite hoped to plant the seed of higher culture into the rough town. So was born the extravagant Calumet Theatre, as opulent as any of the metropolitan America's playhouses. Gilded decorations arched over a thick velvet curtain and ornate stage, which was fronted by row upon row of plush seats. During its heyday, the Opera House stood as the town's sole tower of song and was host to the stars of the American stage, including such 20th century dramatic luminaries as Sarah Bernhardt, Leslie Carter, Houdini, and Madame Helena Modjeska, which I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of those names. Adese, how did I say that before? Lane did not recognize she was staring a part of the theater's history in the face the night she was stranded deep in the Taming of the Shrew's fifth act, with no hope of finishing the play gracefully. The woman hovering high above her in the darkness was the same woman whose portrait hung in the theater's lobby, none other than Helena Modjeska herself. Miss Lane was lucky, for on that night the spirit of the legendary thespian seemed intent on playing patron saint of distressed performers. As Adis Lane, that's what I'm going to go with it, stared up at the ghostly figure. Madame Modesca's mouth slowly began to move, somehow whispering the opening lines of Katharina's last speech in the Shakespeare play. Fie, unknit that threatening unkind brow, and dart not scornful glances from those eyes, to wound thy lord, thy king, thy governor. It blots thy beauty as frost do bite the meads. These first 4 lines triggered the rest of the speech for Adis and Adis's memories, and in the next moment she found the oft-rehearsed words spilling from her mouth, even as the old actress above recited them. The play's last speech rang through the theater, and the show ended amid thunderous applause. Miss Lane poked her head through the curtain and looked up to see if the apparition was still there. The house lights were on, and Adis Lane could see that the members of the appreciative audience on the second balcony were up on their feet clapping, but there was no sign at all of the mysterious woman who had saved her from complete humiliation. Miss Lane realized the woman's identity later on that night when she was socializing with some of the audience members in the lobby. There on the wall hung the portrait of the famous Helena Modesca, whose painted eyes stared at the actress with an eerie kind of knowing. It was then that it dawned on her what had happened, that the spirit of Helena Modesca had come to the aid of another actress in her time of need. Since that night in 1958, there have been frequent reports of bizarre incidents in the Calumet Theatre. There are stories of female apparitions drifting over the catwalks above the stage, wandering the dark, cramped hallways that runs down the back of the second balcony, and fretting over her appearance in the building's dressing room. By all accounts, this figure bears a striking resemblance to the portrait in the theater's lobby. For whatever reason, it seems that Helena Modesca had developed an attachment to the Calumet Theatre in the afterlife. Why Madame Modesca would pick the opera house in Calumet is anyone's guess. She was a 19th century superstar after all, a cosmopolitan celebrity renowned throughout the United States for her memorable portrayals of Shakespearean characters, and received a royalty in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, or London. Some might think it's strange that she would choose a theater in out-of-the-way Calumet as her ultimate resting place. Not that the town's theater wasn't a spectacular building, or Calumet itself wasn't worthy of her presence, but Madame Modesca's home was in California, and if she really had to haunt a place, why not the Metropolitan Opera in New York, or the famous Chestnut Street Theater in Philadelphia? She had performed in these prestigious venues as well. What was it about the Calumet's theater in the modest Upper Peninsula town that drew the attention of the star of the stage? There has been some speculation that it was Adis Lane's part in the taming of the shrew that got Helena's attention. Indeed, it's been said that the legendary actress always connected emotionally with the character of Katharina, and though she was always looking for an opportunity to take on the role. None of the prominent theater groups performed the play while she was alive. Perhaps Helena's ghost was just another audience member of the Calumet Theatre that night and took it on herself to help Adis when she began to flounder. It looks as if Helena has taken a special liking to the lavish old opera house, for things have never been quite the same in the building since Adis Lane was assisted with Katharina's last words on that fateful night. Along with the numerous sightings of the curly-haired apparition Employees working late have heard loud crashes in the middle of the night. Lights are known to go on and off by themselves, and on more than one occasion, the first workers arriving in the morning reported the stage curtains they had left closed the night before were hanging wide open. Meanwhile, people claim to have experienced odd feelings around Helena Modjeska's portrait, twitching nervously under the watchful eyes of the actress in the 19th century painting. Many have sworn that something in the painting was actually watching them. And it seems that the frequency of strange events increases when the same portrait is temporarily taken down. It is then almost invariably that reports of being closely watched by an invisible spectator rise dramatically. Patron and employee alike have often had to leave the building because of the strong sense that they were being studied by a highly critical, disapproving presence. Whether she is assisting frightened actresses or keeping a close eye on everyone in the old theater, it seems that Madame Modjeska has become the Calumet Theatre's supernatural matriarch, until perhaps some other old opera house puts on the Taming of the Shrew. Okay, that one was really cool, and I wish I could show you this picture in the book of Helena Modjeska, because she is really, really pretty. But that was I got chills, and she's a girl's girl. We like that. But yeah, I want to go visit this theater. That's just really cool to me, and it's very interesting that it was that particular play that actually got her attention in a small town rather than one of the big city theaters. Yeah, I really like that one. Okay, on to the next. Alright, our next one is Haunted House in Troy. Most of the Southeast Michigan Ghost Hunting Society's investigations are conducted in houses, not cemeteries. And while Brad Mikulka is often obliged to keep the findings of these forays secret, investigations that take place in the confines of people's homes almost always offer more intimate contact with spirits than do studies of the wide-open spaces in cemeteries. Perhaps hauntings in homes or houses are usually the result of some tragic mortal circumstances specific to the people who lived in the homes, whereas largely nameless energies haunting cemeteries are there only because that is the resting place of their material remains. Whew. However, every generalization has its exceptions. Many gravesite ghosts do have well-documented histories, and a few such stories are recounted here. But for the most part, the ghosts that haunt houses are those paranormal entities that are most closely linked with their human past. Those that have identifiable histories, purposes, or possessions that keep them here in some form even after they have passed on. Such was the case for a house in Troy that an Southeast Michigan Ghost Hunting Society team investigated a few days after Brad returned from the Mason Cemetery. An SEMGHS member named Nick Sykes called Brad about strange things that were happening in the place he was renting. After catching fleeting movements out of the corner of his eye several times, Nick decided to start carrying a camera around with him at the house. These glimpses usually happened when he was lying on the couch, just as his mind was wobbling over that line that separates sleep from consciousness. Moments before his head dropped, turning the page. Nick would catch dark shadows moving quickly across the hall, causing him to bolt to his feet, suddenly awake. The breaking point came one night when he was awakened by a strong, almost suffocating scent, roses. It was as if a mountain of flowers loomed just beyond his sight in the darkness of his room. That, or somebody had sprayed a dozen cans of rose-scented air freshener into the room and closed the door. Jumping out of bed and yelling into the confines of his room, Nick ordered whatever was there to get out while simultaneously snapping a shot in the darkness. Later, when he got a chance to look at the picture he had taken, there were two orbs hovering in the blackness of the photograph. Brad organized an investigation of Nick's house as soon as he laid his eyes on the two celluloid orbs Nick sent to him in the mail. McCullough visited later in August 2001, accompanied by 5 other SEMGHS members. Brad's wife, Brenda, 2 psychics, and 2 supernatural mediums. Brad has stated that he doesn't have a heightened sense with the supernatural, but he usually has at least 2 members who are more physically gifted present during their investigations. According to McCullough's definition, psychics are able to see spiritual entities more readily than most of us, while mediums are gifted in their abilities to actually communicate with these ghostly beings. The entire team witnessed amazing supernatural activity on these investigations. Not only did Brad and Brenda capture some impressive photographs at Nick's house, but the psychics and the mediums were kept busy as well. For reasons that were about to be partially explained, at least 2 ghosts were dwelling in the Troy household. Things got weird when McCullough's digital photos taken in complete darkness were registering bright white areas. These photographs weren't the typical orbs. Brad wasn't sure what they were dealing with. We had no idea how those white blurs got there. It was like somebody was standing too close to the camera when the flash went off. In one room where the psychics were sensing a lot of activity, Brenda took a picture of the darkness, and the faint image of a human neck, shoulder, and arms appeared on her digital camera. But it was not until the team wandered outside the house that the investigation took a sharp turn in the direction of the bizarre. Our psychics sensed a lot of activity just behind the house, where one of the mediums picked up a name, Conan. Apparently, he was a farmer from the early 1900s, and the land we were standing on used to be his farm plot. No sooner had the paranormal team gleaned this information that one of the psychics suddenly felt a sharp pain move up her arm and into her chest. A series of images flooded through the woman's mind, and she was suddenly aware that the farmer's last moments of his life, the last thing the farmer felt before he died, was the same sharp pain in his arm and chest. He was resting against a tree that still stood in the backyard when a number of snakes leapt up at him and bit his arm. Severely startled by the striking serpents, Conan suffered a lethal heart attack and died right there under the tree. Brenda took a picture of the tree in the yard, and sure enough, there in the digital display of her camera was the partial apparition of a man, just like the shot of the neck. Sorry. Page turn. Arm and shoulder taken inside the house. It became clear that Conan, who was still sitting by the tree, was a soul completely lost. The investigators were determined to help. One of the mediums in the yard asked Conan, "Do you see a light? There are people who you know and love that will come and get you and take you into the light." The farmer responded yes. There were actually 8 lights hovering near him. At that moment, Brenda McCullough took a picture of the tree. There in the photograph were 8 orbs of light floating next to a white mist. The medium then helped Conan to pass over to the other side. "Go with them into the light. You'll be at peace." she said. Brad snapped about 5 pictures a few moments later, and there was nothing there but the old tree in the night. It seems that Conan's spirit finally did cross over. Another spirit that resides with Nick in the Troy house didn't seem to be in such a rush to get to the afterlife. In fact, Nick could only stare in shock when one of the mediums called out his grandfather's name while communicating with one of the house's ghosts. It seems that his grandfather's spirit, still protective over his grandson, was keeping close watch over him. This explained Nick's recurring feeling that he was not alone, even when there was nobody else in the room, and made sense of the light blurs and discolorations that hovered over his shoulder in numerous photographs through much of his life. While Conan could only find peace when he joined the spirits of the dead, Nick's grandfather did not want to leave the land of the living. Thus, their investigation in the Troy house was concluded, guiding one lost soul into the light and reuniting another man with the spirit of his grandfather. Ow. That one got me in the Honey Nut Helios. Oh my god. I have never done a house investigation. I don't know if I could really handle doing a house investigation. I'd try one, but I don't know if I could actually film being in there, just because it's very personal and private. But yeah, that one got me in the feelings. Alright, I think we're gonna do one more and we will call it for this episode. What is the last one gonna be? Alright, and for our last one on this spooky Halloween day, or night, whenever you're listening to this, is going to be Usher of the Afterlife. In his book Haunted Michigan, Reverend Gerald Hunter described Walter Honeycutt, a pseudonym, as a modest spiritual man, not given to drama or affection. Yet whoever said still waters run deep had a point with this quite unassuming individual, who rarely speaks of his string of extraordinary supernatural encounters that began in the fall of 1998. I was 4 at that time. This is going to be interesting. It was well after the sun had set over the city of Big Rapids, and the lights were out in practically every home on Hutchinson Street. Walter Honeycutt's house was no exception. Every room was draped in utter stillness of the early morning hours. Walter himself was buried deep under the covers, nestled in bed with his wife Tara, lost in a dreamless slumber. He usually slept easily through the whole night and was so surprised when a gradual return to consciousness left him wide awake well before his alarm was set to go off. Staring up at the ceiling of his bedroom, he instantly knew something wasn't right. Raising his head, Walter saw an old woman with white hair lying in a hospital bed on the other side of his room. Walter and Tara did not have another bed in their room, nor were they keeping any guests, so one would think that the sight of this uninvited visitor in the middle of the night would surprise the man at the very least. But for some reason, he felt completely calm. He blinked twice, but she was still there, looking at him with wide-eyed fear. A moment later, he realized the woman's thoughts were in his mind, that she was somehow communicating with him telepathically. She communicated to me that she had just died, Walter told Reverend Hunter, and she was wondering if it was all right to move on to the next world. She was frightened, like she didn't know what to do. As she conveyed all this to me, she also told me she was the mother of one of the guys I worked for. Though he had never seen the woman before, Walter's heart went out to the old lady. Recognizing the fundamental plight of humanity in the woman's last mortal fear, he felt an overwhelming empathy for her. He wanted to reassure her that she was not alone, that everything was going to be fine. No sooner had these thoughts come to him that he knew she had heard them, and her image slowly began to fade away. He saw the hard edge of fear leave her eyes just before she disappeared completely. and he was suddenly alone with his wife again. Walter shook Tara as soon as the old woman was gone. Thrilled at what had just transpired, he told her everything. She listened as best as can be expected of anyone woken at that hour. Silent for a few moments after her husband had finished, Tara reassured Walter that she believed him and went back to sleep. Honeycutt was left awake, uncertain of whether his wife was taking him seriously. The next morning at work, when Walter learned that his boss's mother had passed away in East Lansing, he knew that she was the woman who had visited him the night before. He brought it up to one of his coworkers at lunch, but the man looked at him as if he had just slipped off the proverbial rocker. Honeycutt then determined that it was probably best to keep those kind of thoughts to himself, these kind of thoughts to himself. And there would be more food for such thought before long. Christmas was only a few days away when Walter received his second late-night visitor that year. Sometime around 2 a.m., I drifted awake again, Honeycutt told Hunter, and this time there was a woman sort of hovering over my bed. She was about 70 years old, with dyed brown hair, wearing a heavy, very modest nightgown. This time it was someone I had seen before, and knew instantly she was a friend of my mother's from down in Grand Rapids. Her approach to communicating with Walter was different from the first lady he had used, but her message was the same. She had just died and was frightened of moving on. As the spirit of the woman spoke with him, Walter realized that they had been suddenly transported to her house. He had never been at her place before, and as he drifted through the kitchen by the side of the dead woman's spirit, he could not help noticing the smallest details of her worldly possessions. The cheap dinette set, the magnets on the fridge, the kitschy ceramics chickens on the shelf above her sink. The two hovered up the stairs and into the woman's bedroom, where they stood at her bedside and looked down at her dead body laying there under her covers. Her spirit form looked at Walter again. She was frightened. He felt the same sort of compassion for her as he had for the woman who appeared to him in the fall, and he reassured her that everything was okay. The instant that she vanished, he found himself wide awake back in his bed in Big Rapids. Again, he woke up Tara, and this time the couple jotted down the details of the encounter, hoping that they might be able to substantiate the whole encounter with hard facts. Honeycutt had previously promised his mother that he would go down to Grand Rapids to visit her the next day. There was a lump of apprehension in his throat the entire way down Highway 131, for the woman who had visited him the night before was his mother's next-door neighbor. Breakfast turned into lunch, and Walter was only half conscious of his conversation with his mother, so fixated was he on what was or wasn't happening in the house next door. No word came until just before noon, when their talk was interrupted by a knock on his mother's back door. The neighbor's eldest son was at the doorway. He told Mrs. Honeycutt that he had come to his mother's house to visit her that morning, only to find that she had passed away sometime in the night before. Understandably grief-stricken, he asked if the Honeycutts would mind waiting with him at his mother's place for the coroner to arrive. Walter's heart was beating rapidly in his chest. His legs trembled when he walked into the old woman's home. Everything was as he had seen it the night before. The furniture, the fridge magnets, the dinette set, the chickens. When he and his mother went up to take a look at the dead woman in her bedroom, she was lying in the exact same pose that Walter had seen her the night before. It was then that he and his wife knew beyond any doubt that his dreams really were visits from the dead. Turning the page. But contrary to what the reader may think, Walter was not at all perturbed by this supernatural correspondence. In fact, something about the spiritual visits imbued him with a newfound peace and strengthened his religious faith. He felt privileged that these spirits had chosen him to unburden their worst fears upon. And so his life went on as normal, and he kept his 2 paranormal experiences to himself. Almost a year went by before Walter would have another ghostly experience. It happened on a mid-October evening in 1999. Walter woke up in the middle of the night to find himself standing in a rest home at his Uncle Larry's bedside. Larry was something of a pariah in Walter's family. A hedonist who had not troubled himself with the consequences of his actions or the feelings of others throughout much of his life. He had spent the bulk of his days womanizing and guzzling booze. He left a long trail of hurt and bitterness behind, and the person he'd hurt the most was his loving wife. Looking down at his uncle's still form, he knew that the man was nearing his end. His liver and kidneys were barely functioning as a result of all the alcohol he had consumed, and the lines in his haggard face spoke of a man with nothing left to give. But he was still alive. Walter sensed his uncle's thoughts underneath his closed eyelids. Larry knew that his nephew was a spiritual man, and he had a request for him. Walter knew what it was. He leaned down close to his old uncle's face. "Do you want me to pray with you?" Walter asked. The second the words left his mouth, Larry's eyes shot open, and he threw his hands up, grabbing Walter around the neck and pulling the young man down towards him. An instant later, Walter was back in his darkened home, sitting up in bed. Given his last 2 experiences with spirits, Walter knew that he had to go see his uncle as soon as possible. Unlike the other 2 frightened souls, he sensed that his own uncle was not dead yet, but was terrified at the possibility of dying without absolution of his dissolent and self-centered ways. After work the next day, Walter headed south for Grand Rapids to see his Uncle Larry. Arriving at the nursing home, Walter recognized his uncle's room immediately. It was exactly as it had appeared in his journey the night before. Almost instinctively, he walked up to his uncle's bed and asked the same question he had asked the last time he was there. "Uncle Larry," Walter whispered, "would you like me to pray with you?" Again, the old man's eyes shot open, and he grabbed his nephew, pulling him close. Walter would later say that he had never seen anyone look so scared. They sat together and prayed for a couple of hours before Larry drifted off into a deep sleep. Honeycutt drove back to Big Rapids that night and waited for the call. Around 11 o'clock the next morning, his aunt was on the telephone telling him that Larry had died in his sleep that morning. Who knows why some spirits of the recently deceased have chosen Walter to speak to in their final hours? Have the man's actions inadvertently turned him into some kind of gatekeeper to the netherworld? Or perhaps he has been endowed with an innate spiritual sensitivity that attracts lost souls. And why do some souls come to him while the vast majority of those people he has known in the Big Rapids area do not? Walter himself is at a loss to explain the purpose behind his encounters, but he does remain grateful for the opportunity to have such an eye-opening experiences, and feels that the contract he has had with these souls before they departed from the earthly plane is nothing less than a blessing from God. That one was definitely not what I expected whenever I first initially, like, started it, but, like, that was actually really interesting, and I like how that was done. Yeah. Let me know, guys. Have you ever had someone either that you've known in your life or your family come in to visit you just before they've gone? And what did you think of this? Do you want me to read more stories from this, or, like, you know, any other book that has to do ghost stories? And it doesn't have to be from Michigan. It could be from all over. It was just actually kind of cool reading stories of, like, places I've heard of growing up. So, yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up. Please make sure to give the podcast a like. Go ahead and rate it on Spotify. You can find the podcast on the following platforms: Podbean, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Listen Notes, Podchaser, Boomplay, Podcast Addict, Deezer, Samsung, and of course Spotify. Guys, I hope you have a wonderful and safe holiday. I hope you get all the candy you like, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next venture. All right, bye guys.